Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate you guys giving me your Saturdays, and it's a beautiful day. You could be outside, but you're here hanging out with us, which I really, really appreciate. So you guys know why you're here. This is part 2 of our History of Vasquez Rocks series. So this is a really fun one. This is one of my favorite ones. A lot of special stuff that we're going to cover, a lot of stuff that's very meaningful, not only to me, but to a lot of people who love and appreciate this land. So hopefully we can show you some really neat things, stuff you didn't know, maybe stuff that you can look into partaking in and having fun with. So there's a lot of cool opportunities that come out of the stuff that I'm going to show you guys. So we'll go ahead and go. So today we're going to talk about the earliest inhabitants of this area as well as the Tataviam. We're going to do, actually, so I flip-flopped it already. I'm going to talk about the transition to European, Mexican, and early American eras, and then we're going to do a quick intermission. And then we're going to talk about our little resident scoundrel, which is why I know a lot of you guys are here. I know that's why Miss Bernice is here. She's all excited about it. So anytime I do slideshows that talk about our native heritage, I always dedicate it to 3 very special people, even though I wish I could dedicate it to 200 people. But these are 3 guys that, in the bigger picture, but also for me in my life, really helped me find and harbor this appreciation for our native heritage and this really long, incredibly rich history that we have here that a lot of people don't even know about, that we don't really get to learn about. Except through kind of avenues like this, where we go out of our way to really learn more. So the first one is Rudy Sr., really incredible guy that I was lucky enough to know before he passed away suddenly. He was just an incredible person, huge in the movement of Southern California for Native rights, Native recognition, cultural revival, all the really, really important stuff that allows us to see and appreciate and learn about Native cultures today. So he was the tribal president of the Tataviam, who we're going to talk a lot about today. Really, just a really, really cool guy. And his son now, Rudy Jr., so you'll hear us say Rudy Sr. and Jr., is the tribal leader now. Really cool guy. We're going to talk about Rudy a little bit because he's not here, so we can say whatever we want. The next one is Charlie. And I want little Miss Bernice to wave her hand because this is Charlie's cousin. And a lot of you guys might have known Charlie. He lived out here. I see nodding heads. He lived out here for a million years. Troublemaker, wonderful man, really, really, really great, caring, charismatic. Like a lot of the way that I even do public speaking, I get from Charlie. He was just so, like Rudy, just so passionate about teaching anybody that wanted to learn. There was no discrimination of, oh, you're not a tribal family member, you're from here, you're from there. You're young, you're older, they don't care. Anyone that wanted to learn and anyone that wants to learn is welcomed with open arms, which I just think is so wonderful. And guys like this, you know, these wonderful elders are the ones that really paved the way for younger folks now that are sitting right here. I'm gonna keep calling on these guys because they're our family, raise your hand, family members, so everybody knows what we're looking at. So we have, oh, back there too. So we have 2 tribal senators and one of the tribal elders. So we're going to be picking on them a little bit. But they know, so and we're going to talk about it, the tribe just is so strong in education and outreach today, and that's because those that came before, earlier, you know, Rudy starting to work from the 1940s when he was a young man just fresh out of the Pacific in World War II. So a lot of dedication of their lives to all of this. So it's very much appreciated, and I hope they know that. And the last one is my dad, who was buddies with these 2. And my dad, again, learned from guys like Charlie and Rudy how important it is to share and educate information about the land that you're on, even if you're not from here. You know, my dad wasn't born and raised here, but he moved here because he felt this overwhelming connection and appreciation to this place. And that was passed on to me. You know, I always tell people, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to die here when I'm 100 years old, hopefully. So just, you know, dedicating this educational series and this talk especially to these guys, and just appreciative of everything that they've done for us and to get the knowledge out there. So before we start, we're going to talk a lot about archaeology. So I want to just throw some terms at you so you know what I'm talking about. So prehistoric versus historic, I don't really differentiate between these two, but a lot of people do. So typically when you hear prehistoric, it means before European contact, so before highly specified writing, basically. So they consider the native cultures here before, you know, the Spanish language and the English language made contact with the continent. They consider that prehistoric. To me, I don't really appreciate that designation because it's human history. It's all of our history. So I don't use that, but if you guys do some reading, you'll see it. That's what that is. And historic meaning after contact. Archaeology is, you guys probably know what that is, but it's a subcategory of anthropology, which is the study of people, and it's the study of people through the physical remains that they leave behind. So you can have what they call prehistoric archaeology, which is, you know, hundreds to thousands of years old, or you can have historic archaeology, which is World War II sites, things that are much newer. Artifacts and features. So an artifact is something like this. It's portable. It's something you can pick up and take with you. A feature is something that's left behind that you can't move, like an old fire ring, like rocks that were a fire pit. Oral histories, those are histories that are recorded for the purpose of preservation, of writing them down. Ethnography is, I'm going to read this one because it's kind of a long definition. The study of single groups through direct contact with the people, particularly through interviews and observations. So this includes the work of J.P. Harrington, which is a great example of native Californian ethnographies, and is a great resource to further study if you guys are interested in that. Ethnobotany is the study of how a culture used plants. And then this is another one that I kind of vary on. BCE and CE is what I use instead of BC and AD, because it's just a little bit more of a scientific way to do it. So in scholarly works, you'll see it written like that. So it stands for before Common Era, which is basically BC, and then Common Era, which is AD. So you'll see that. Okay, so one of my favorite things to talk about with the history of California is how incredibly diverse it was. It still is, obviously, right? California is diverse in every single way. In terms of geology, plant life, animal life, it's incredibly diverse, and it's always been like that, which is really amazing. So the numbers kind of change as they refine and group things together, but overall, there was roughly 200 different tribal groups in California and over 100 distinct languages. So wrap your head around that. So these are language families that are on this map. So if you see the brighter color, the smaller one in the corner, is the language families, and then the big map is actual tribal groups. So we're right here. Tataviam's right there. So you can see we're kind of small compared to some of the other areas. Like Serrano, just this purple right here is a huge, huge territory, but especially the coastal north is covered with small tribal groups too. So very, very, very diverse. So kind of just keep that in mind as we go on and talk about different practices and what native California really looked like. The ways that we know what we know about this really rich history comes from a handful of sources primarily. The biggest one is archaeological evidence, and that includes dating methods like carbon-14 dating or DNA research. Tataviam ethnographies, which were recorded in the 1800s by scholars like J.P. Harrington. Genealogical research is a huge one, and all of the Rudies have been incredible with growing family trees and doing tons of genealogical research. It's amazing what they've done. Mission records have been very helpful, but also a huge part of it is just ancestral knowledge that's passed down. So this is a neat one here. So as Vasquez Rocks was becoming a county park, there was a lot of research that they did, because this, as we'll talk about later, this was all private property. This half was all a giant homestead, and the half over here was privately owned by the Asher family, a very wealthy family that was in this area. So when the county was obtaining it, you have to do, and this was in the rise of environmental research, when you actually had to know what you were acquiring and what you were doing and what your impacts would be. So they actually performed research and excavations in this area and on private properties nearby also, just to evaluate and see what they were dealing with. So these are cool photos. These are from between 1968 and 1970 for a crew led by Chester King, who's he's a cool old hippie guy. He's been doing archaeology since he was very young. He has his PhD. Really, really interesting guy. And the running joke, because I used to be an archaeologist before I got this job, and I went to Cal State Northridge. So back when they did these, it was San Fernando Valley State College, which I love, yeah. And then it was part of the Northridge Archaeological Research Center. I'll let you figure out the abbreviation for that, which was funny because it was a bunch of hippies working in the department. And they still, all those guys, they're like in their 70s now mostly, and they all still joke about it, but yeah. So they were looking for the physical remains that are still here, right? Because this was one of the largest Tataviam village sites, and it was inhabited for incredibly long periods of time. And so some of the physical remains that we see, I'm going to show you a couple features really quick. I actually put these in the wrong order, but that's okay. We'll cover them real fast. So while they were doing surveying and excavation, they would find things in the area like this. So these are a bedrock mortar. These are the big grinding holes that you guys will see in huge pieces of rock. So sometimes they're portable, like a bowl. Those are just mortars. These are bedrock mortars because they're in big pieces of rock. So another one kind of associated that they don't know. People will argue, people will say, I know exactly what it means, and other people are like, we have no idea what they are called cupules. So they're much smaller. They're usually on average about this big. And they may be for doing medicine, pigment, anything like that, except we find them also on near vertical or overhanging surfaces too. So that was not holding anything because of, gravity. So that's just kind of an interesting one. And these are not ones that are in the park. These are actually at the foot of the Sierra Pelonas, but so only a couple miles up the road. And this is a huge boulder. It's like the size of a sofa, and it's just covered, which is really, really interesting. Yeah, no, they're human made. Yeah, they're very smooth, they're polished. It's really weird. So things like that you'll see in the vicinity of village sites, and this is a really great, you guys will see the same names over the Ortegas, the Cooks, Garcias, like you'll see the same family names a million times. So this is Larry Ortega, which was one of Rudy Sr.'s sons. And he did this awesome illustration of what a traditional village site would look like. So even here at Vasquez, this is a lot of what you would see, very simple but very effective structures made all of natural materials. So these we call a quiche. Not like the breakfast. Everybody's like the breakfast? I'm like, no. But they were basically domed structures. They could vary in materials depending on where you were. If you're in an area that has a lot of, like if you're in Chumash territory and you have tule, that works great. We don't really have that here. We never have had that much. But you can use any kind of grasses or yucca or anything that you can really use to drape over itself. And it's like you would with shingles where it overlays onto the layer below it so that you don't get rain coming in. But they, gathered around. They weren't permanent structures. They would last as long as they lasted, and then they could be refurbished or rebuilt, materials reused. And that's why, too, we don't have a ton of evidence left visible on the landscape because they were so minimal on their impact, which is really a lot to be said for that we had people living here that will show for thousands of years, literally thousands of years people lived here, and you would almost barely know it unless you know exactly what to look for. So the earliest date that we know for sure people were in the park boundaries, today's boundaries, is around 4,300 years ago. It's a long time. And that's actually even pre-Tataviam. So the Tataviam was the last tribe that was here. And they're the tribe that we know the most about, obviously, and we still have descendants from. But these earlier inhabitants, we don't know where they came from. We don't know what they're called. We'll probably never know, which is really, kind of unfortunate, but we still have traces of the life that they led here. So we know these dates through a really, really cool testing, a dating method. So I don't know if you guys know carbon-14 dating. You guys hear of that, radiocarbon dating. It's the big famous one. That works only on things that are organic or that were alive. So wood, animal bone, leather, anything like that, plant material, you can date those. Rock is really, really hard to date unless it's special types of volcanic rock. Volcanic is the best because you can usually try to date it and you can usually try to source it, which is really helpful. So luckily, there's been a lot of obsidian found here, which helps us date and locate where they were getting this stuff. So in this book right here, which is super fancy and hard to get. So Terry Lee Caruso was another student at CSUN. CSUN's been a hub for people studying this area. That's where I went also. So this was Terry's thesis, master's thesis. It's called Trade Among the Tataviam. It took me years to find this, but it's a really great report on the trade system, and it talks about the trade network in Southern California. So obsidian is not naturally occurring here. We don't have any of it, but we have found a lot of it. Like you guys probably saw in the case on the table up there, there was a lot of obsidian, and it actually mostly comes from the Cosos, so up by like Mammoth, so hundreds of miles away. And the really cool thing with obsidian is that you can source it, because every flow area that creates obsidian has a different signature, but you can also date when it was altered by people, which is the best thing ever. So you can take a projectile point, what we call an arrowhead, but it's technically a projectile point, and you can date when it was flaked because the surface of it, so you can see how it's rough on your left. I'm like, it's the wrong way. That's what happens to obsidian over time when it's left in the weather, right? It gets kind of a rind on it. It calluses, it weathers really, really rough. But if you flake it, you guys have probably seen it, it's like glass, it's shiny, it's perfect. So you can date how long a surface has been exposed. So if we find a projectile point that's been worked by people, you can date when those flakes were made on it, which is really amazing. So Terry Caruso did that as part of his thesis and pinned these really, really old dates, which is pretty amazing. And likely it's probably a lot older than that, but it's one of those things where we'll have to keep pushing and keep trying to see if we can move that date back even further. So this is what a traditional Tataviam kind of kitchen setup would look like. We did have basketry out here. It's funny how we put our ego in front of a lot of things. So I grew up, not from my dad, because my dad knew better, but a lot of people would say, oh, the Tataviam didn't use basketry. They didn't have basketry out here. And it's like, why? Oh, because we don't find any. Would you find basket made out of grasses that's 500 plus years old? No. Because we find a ton of stone stuff, because stone lasts forever. But yucca makes really great basketry. And there's yucca everywhere, so why would they not? So we have to remove our ego. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And remember that this was probably a really great area for basketry because there was such, Injuncus and all these different grasses and plants that you can make stuff with. So I'm gonna pass around a few different things. So these are, most of what I have that I'm gonna pass around are newer made. So these were made, I can't remember her name that made these. I think she was Shumash. A friend gave this to me recently. So this is what our basketry would have looked like. It's juncus and it's coiled. So imagine this, just a lot, that it would keep going and going. And it's decorated with acorns from a coast live oak. So you can kind of get a 2-for-1 and see what those look like. And then here's another one that came from a different artist, but this is also newer. And this is a really, you can see the handiwork in this tiny, tiny coils on that. Her fingers must have hurt afterwards. And we also have, so I'm just gonna throw you guys a bunch of stuff. So this is not yucca because that takes a long time. This is just twine, but this kind of gives you the idea too of the type of bags and little pouches that you could carry things in. So this simple knotting type they believe was also used. So you can check that one out. So, and here's one that I show people when they say, oh, we didn't have basketry. Then why do we find so many of these? So this is called a hopper mortar. This is actually a picture of the case over there. So if you guys want to look later, this exact setup is over there. So we find these bowls that are very shallow, but have an indent and a ring that's stained with asphaltum, tar basically, because you would attach a basket without a bottom to the top of it. So you could use it as a grinding surface, but it would really hold everything a little bit easier. So that's what I say to people when they say, we didn't have basketry. So one of the artifacts that we do see the most of is what's called groundstone. So there's flaked stone, right, which you flake, like flint knapping, and there's groundstone, which you grind to create. So I'm going to pass a few more around. So this one I want you to look at really carefully. So if you're right-handed, this one will work really well for you. So this is a type of groundstone tool. This is a mano, Spanish for hand. But if you hold it just right, there's a indent for your thumb, and it fits perfect. It's kind of more for a bigger hand. My hand's kind of small for it, but feel the polish on it on the bottom. So this was really, really heavily used. And this is just a really fine granitic material. It's really heavy, so be careful to not drop it on the ground, but it's a really neat way to see food processing, and that would be used for grinding a lot of the hard foods that you wouldn't want to just crunch on, like acorns. So we find smaller stuff like that, but there's also been a lot of large tools, right? These are the big Costco industrial size tools. So this slab is not the one that's in here. This is a different one. It's almost, I think it's just shy of like 3 feet. It's pretty big. So that's a big grinding slab that you would use as a work surface. Oh, I'm gonna put these two on the spot. We have a couple more family members. That's Joe and Tina, everybody. I love putting them on the spot. It's my favorite thing. So you also have mortars and pestles, which everybody's heard of. These are deeper bowls. This one's really interesting because this was actually found in an alluvial, so a layer of sediment deposited that they think is about 15,000 years old. It's pretty amazing. So it makes you wonder how long people were here for. We've found numerous bowls or fragments of bowls that are like this. That thing weighs 100 pounds. That one is massive. And I think that might be the one that's at COC right now. And then there's a lot of, smaller sized ones. This is my dad's hand. So a little bit more portable. Not that you would want to carry that around, but if you're moving to another neck of the woods, you wouldn't take the big 100-pounder, you'd leave that, but you could take some of the smaller ones with you. And here's another, I don't know if you guys feel like carrying this one. This one's kind of heavy too, but this is a really beautiful pestle. And you can feel and see the polishing and shaping on this one. And this is another granitic material too, so it's very heavy. So if it's too heavy, you can pass it on to the next person, or I know we're all kind of spaced out, but kind of neat to be able to see those up close. So like I said, a lot of variety in the groundstone that we have. So there's this one that's really huge. This is Bill, who is not a short guy, sitting next to it. But then there's also ones that we find that are super small, like this one's about 5 inches across. Really, really cute little thing. So aside from, as we said, groundstone tools, we have a lot of flaked stone tools, which are really handy for a number of different things, not only just hunting, but skinning, food preparation, anything that you would need it for. What's neat is out here we have a huge variety in the materials that we find. So we have things like chert, obsidian, rhyolite, chalcedony, quartzite, andesite, jasper, and even quartz. If you have a really good rock crystal quartz that's very clear, you can flake that. I've seen projectile points that are clear quartz, and they're so beautiful and very sharp. These are actually mostly on display in here too. These all might be on display. Yeah, and this one, that's what we call a biface. It's about that big. It means business. So one of my favorite things to talk about are the materials that are indicators of trade. So like I said, things like obsidian, we don't just find out here, so how did it get here? So there's a lot of really great works on trade networks in California, not even just Southern California, but in California. So the way my dad used to kind of describe it is that we were kind of like the hub of a wheel in this area right here, because we're at that point where the desert and the Central Valley kind of start to meet, where we have the south and we have the coast. We have all of these things, and we have these wicked mountains and valleys that you guys know are the San Gabriels and down through Santa Clarita, right? That's why the Newhall Pass was such a bear for the homesteaders and pioneers to get through, because they had to cut Beals Cut because it was so hard to pass through. Even if you're on foot, right? It's still very challenging, but trade was an incredibly important aspect of Native society. So things that we have found here that are not from here include all kinds of different things, but we do have stuff that's marine. So this is a little small, one of many shell beads that have been found in the area. We have mother of pearl and abalone, which are really beautiful for making pendants or other ceremonial items. This little clay thing, that weird looking thing, is actually in the building, so if you want to look at that too. So we don't have the right clay and other naturally occurring materials to make ceramics and clay objects very well. So this, they believe, came in from the Arizona area or maybe New Mexico. And also, so this is one of the most important finds that has been found in this area. So this is one, I don't know if you guys have heard of John Johnson that works at the Natural History Museum of Santa Barbara. He said that this is probably the most significant find in this area. It's actually made of an oak gall, so a defect that grows in the wood. It's probably like the size of a cantaloupe, good size thing. And for some reason it was very important. You can see it had a handle that broke off. It's basket woven at the top with fiber, and it kind of, because last time I saw it I was a kid, and I remember it kind of looked like Frankenstein because it had been repaired. It had like stitches where it had cracked on the side, which was kind of interesting. We never got to get a carbon date off of it because unfortunately it's privately owned. Someone found it on a nearby property, and it was on display down at the Historical Society at Hart Park for a while, and then it was taken back, and we haven't seen it in about 15 or more years probably. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, hoping it's still okay, hoping it's being stored all right. But you know, we do have photos of it. We did get to have some professionals look at it and say that, yeah, this is something really special, but I wish we could have carbon dated it, because that would be really something really remarkable. So another one, my favorite, is soapstone or steatite, which is a really, really important piece here because it was our hook into the trade network. You guys know you can't just hop into a trade network, right? If you don't have anything to contribute, you can't just take and be like, oh, give me all those shells, please, and not give anything. This was our contribution, and this was a material that was and still is highly desired. So it's kind of funny because if you think of a lot of tribal groups, it's like society today. A lot of the wealthy folks, materially wealthy folks, live on the coast, right? Malibu, you have all these beautiful areas. So Malibu, they had not only tons of shell, tons of abalone, tons of all the really good stuff, but they also had sources of soapstone. That's not even fair. So they had all that really great stuff that they would trade, to inland tribes. But at the foot of the Sierra Pelonas is I think it is the only Southern California inland source of this soapstone. So we've also found a lot of that in the area. A lot of different uses. Soapstone's really great because, as you guys know, you can carve it pretty easily. It's beautiful. So I'm going to pass this around. So this was from our workshop the other day, because this is what the Tataviam does, is they show you how to make things and they give you the materials, and it's just the best thing ever. So Ted Garcia, who's one of our elders also that we're going to talk a little bit about, held a workshop on carving steatite or soapstone. So I made this one, that's why it's terrible, don't judge me. Just look at how pretty the stone is. But you can do everything from ornamental or ceremonial objects. You can make really beautiful pipes out of them. Or if you look at this guy with these kind of two lines, they make awesome arrow shaft straighteners because soapstone really holds heat very well and very evenly. So you could heat that up and then obviously put a leather skin in your hand so you don't burn yourself, and run that on a branch of willow or any other material that you're using, and it'll make it a perfectly straight arrow, which is really, really useful. And most of these are actually on display over here in the display case over there. So a couple other interesting things. These are actually made out of tufa, which is kind of a really crumbly feeling volcanic stone. And it's really hard to see right here, but that one up there is neat. It's actually like a jar lid. It fits perfectly in the right size circular, like a mortar. So either a bedrock mortar or a bowl of some kind. It was a perfect lid for that because they had field mice back then also. And this one, these are all in the case here too. That one is interesting because I didn't know what it was for a long time, and then we were at a workshop where they were using the pump, the old kind of drills, and we figured out what it was. You would hold it between your feet and sit, and it's the base of, you would put whatever you were drilling on top of it, which is like really smart. And so you can see it's hard to see, but it's got 5 holes drilled into it from people drilling through things like soapstone or shell. Here we also have bone tools. We have a bone needle, which is looks brand new because it was really well, I think it was in a rock shelter where someone found it, and a bone awl for doing things like working with leather. So moving on, so those are our stone tools. Let me see if there's anything else we want to pass around that's up here. So you got the soapstone. Okay, I think we're good. I always forget to pass the stuff around. So commonly utilized plants. And the interesting thing with the Tataviam, I guess I should tell you guys where their territory was. And it's important to keep in mind that territories and borders were not the same as they are now, right? They weren't like, oh, you're in my turf, get out. That was not a thing. That was not a thing. As far as anyone can tell, there is no evidence of warring or fighting in Southern California or through most of California. Native societies really worked well together. There was intermarrying, there was trading, there was good relationships. There were some aspects, obviously, it wasn't all just like kumbaya holding hands all the time, but overall, all of these, like you guys saw, all of these 100 plus distinct, or 200 plus tribal groups got along for thousands of years really, really, really well, which we could all learn from. So depending on where the Tataviam were, so their territory kind of ranged from sort of the southern Antelope Valley, so like through Acton, through much of the Angeles National Forest, this area out towards like by Rancho Camulos, so like off the 126, out that way towards the coast, and then all through San Fernando, out towards parts of Simi. So a big area, right? And then you transfer to neighboring tribes such as the Tongva, the Chumash, Katanamuck up to the north, the Serrano. So it was a pretty good sized area, right? And probably areas where a lot of you live still. It's probably the old Tataviam territory. So the Tataviam group here kind of would eat some different stuff though from those that living down in San Fernando Valley. So there's not junipers down there, right? But there's a ton here and there always has been. So you have different reliances, right? So here, staple foods a lot of the time could be things like the juniper seeds, oak, acorns, which I'll pass around. But you guys will see these are little tiny ones. These are from the scrub oak. They're little bitty guys, but not like the big monster ones from the coast live oak. So down through like Santa Clarita, they've got tons. So they're pretty big. So they would trade. Obviously, you know, they had friends and family over the hill that they'd go gather and bring them in. But when you have a lot of readily material available around here, it's easier just to make do with what you've got. So another one is that you guys will see up here is yucca, and I don't know if you knew if you could eat yucca, but this is a really great photo from the tribe too. This is from a workshop earlier this year where they harvested and prepared and ate yucca, the blooms from the yucca plant. So the yucca is really great. You can use it tip of the very top of it all the way down to the bottom of the root. You can eat the root, but a really great avenue of food is actually the buds and the blooms of the flowers. They actually taste really good. So this just kind of shows part of the processing in different phases of eating that beautiful yucca flower. So we'll hop to animals real quick. So another thing, obviously there was a lot of plant material consumed, but you picture back then, we've got a lot of ground squirrels, we got a lot of wood rats, we have all these critters running around that make great food. I don't know about you guys, but have you seen a big fat California ground squirrel? Yeah, that's good eating, and they're easy to catch. They're so easy to catch. So it sounds weird to us now. And my grandma grew up in Missouri, so I have a picture of her holding her rifle and like 12 squirrels. They're just easy, you know? So, and things like the desert cottontail rabbit, great food. They reproduce in huge numbers. There was a lot more of the jackrabbit, black-tailed jackrabbit also, and you guys know that's a big animal too. So we also had a lot more deer. We still have deer in the area, but there was a lot more back then. And there was likely pronghorn in this area. So this is the animal that is the reason the Antelope Valley is called the Antelope Valley, because these guys were everywhere. But it's funny, again, here's our little ego, because they're not even an antelope at all. So Pronghorn Valley, just start calling it Pronghorn Valley and be like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and then small, and I hate to say it, easy to catch birds like the California quail too are also a good source of food. So here's some of the smaller mammals that could have been food sources. And Charlie used to always joke about mouse burritos. Do you remember him talking about that? He would always, because we'd be monitoring on a project together, and he'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go home and make some mouse burritos. I'm like, you're silly. Mouse burrito, I know. Because he met an old lady somewhere on the coast somewhere, and she used to, she grew up in the time of the Great Depression, so they hardly had anything. And I think she grew up on a reservation too, so they were very, very poverty stricken. And she said that she became good at catching mice, and she would make mouse burritos. But, what's different from a mouse and a chicken? It's all, it's all good. So these are just some of the small native animals that they could catch and eat. Some of the larger mammals that were not used as food, though, which is very interesting. And as you guys look at these are all animals that hold spiritual or cultural significance, right? And it's interesting because there's also a bit of a scientific background to that, because eating an animal that primarily eats meat does not taste very good. They're really hard to catch, and they don't taste right? If eating an animal that's grass-fed, like if you guys have grass-fed beef, it's great. Eating something like, say raccoon that eats a lot of different stuff, coyote, it's not gonna taste that great. But also, so they kind of think that's maybe where a lot of the spiritual significances of some of these animals tens of thousands of years ago started to arise. And then there was just this general respect of these animals are really incredible. If you just sit and watch either of the cats hunt, they're superhuman. They can go above and beyond anything that a person could do. And we still have, and we had all of these species here then too. And another thing Charlie used to kind of tell me is, and Bernice might have to fill it in for me a little bit, that there was, different family groups, and out here there was kind of a division between the coyote group and the mountain lion group. I just remember him always saying that when I was really little. But it's just, so very symbolic, very important, very meaningful, very, very much to be appreciated still to this day. So let me see if I skipped anything for you guys. Okay, and I'm really skimming over a lot of the knowledge that's readily available on this, but I'm gonna plug their website afterwards, because if you guys wanna know more about any of this, go to their website. The tribe spends a lot of time and effort to make this beautiful and beautifully accessible site that has thousands of years of history, cultural knowledge, events. They do a lot of events, so everything's on there, so I'm kind of scooting it along a little bit fast. So one thing people always ask about, and I'm always torn on even talking about the rock art because it's so sensitive, and it's something that, it's like the rest of the archaeology, once it's gone, it can't be replaced. Once it's messed up, once it erodes, it's gone forever. So we do have, because this was a village site, in this vicinity and all the way down to the Sierra Polonas, the foot of the hills over there, there's rock art. And it's in the form of pictographs, which is when it's just like this, that's just pigment on rock. And like at the foot of the hills way over there, there's actual petroglyphs that kind of look like the Great Basin style of horned sheep and different shapes like that are etched into the rock, which is really cool. The interesting thing about the rock art in this whole area is that it mixes styles. There's some panels that are very distinctive. They call it Vasquez incised. It's its own thing. But there's pieces like this that are very heavily Chumash inspired, which is interesting. And then at the foot of the hills, those are very desert looking. So there was a lot of people passing through and coming into this area. The rock art is most likely Tataviam. I should point out that Tataviam, they believe, migrated into this area around 450 AD. So they were here for well over 1,000 years. And rock art typically doesn't do well, especially pigmented rock art, doesn't last thousands of years most of the time, unless, like in Europe, you guys have seen where they have panels that are 25, 30,000 years old because they're in caves and protected. But out here in the desert, it's a little harder to make it that long. So this is kind of what they believe is more of a Chumash style frog. It has raked hands. You can kind of see it's got 4 fingers and 4 toes on each of its feet. This is the one that's my favorite. So it's really beautiful, but if you look at the rays, they're human fingers. So someone got the pigment, the ochre, which I'll pass around. So that's the most commonly used pigment on our rock art here, which is red ochre. So this was my dad's. This thing is like 30 years old. It's probably much more expensive now, but it's a mineral that you grind up and it makes this really rich red or yellow pigment. So that's what it looks like in powder form. And the reason that we don't talk more about rock art or show people where it is, and why everybody asks me, oh, where's the rock art? Because some of it's on private property, and I'm like, I'm not gonna tell you, because this is what happens when people find it. Not everybody, obviously, most people mean well, but, and it might be kind of hard for you guys to see, these are not supposed to be there. That's someone hitting it with a rock and scraping. And this one is really, really unfortunate because I go and I talk to a lot of the landowners and property owners that do have rock art. And I'll check in and photograph and make sure everything's going okay. So do you see that to your left, the white? That's not supposed to be there. Someone tried to flake this off of the rock because it's on layered sandstone. So they thought they could somehow peel it off or something. Criminals are not very smart, you guys. But yeah, because I went out and within 4 months, checked it, 4 months later came out and I saw that and I was horrified that someone had tried to do this. Luckily, they stopped, and luckily they didn't hit the image itself, but they did damage all the way around it. So it's one of those things where we just, it's quiet because it's not worth these things being gone forever. But we do have images of them all throughout the building. Back in the corner, there's some more photos. And there's some Chumash style rock art. I think it's the condor that's over there that's really, really beautiful and really intricate. And there's a lot of other public or privately owned properties that you can see rock art. If you go out to like the petroglyphs at China Lake is really amazing. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. Or there's a lot all throughout LA County. There's different state park and national park lands that you can also safely visit rock art sites. But in this area, very quiet. So we're going to lead into European contact. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? Native materials or anything like that? And our Tataviam story is in no way over. This is kind of our period of transition right here. So we'll talk about this transition and then I'll give you guys a little break, and then we'll do a little ending part with what the Tataviam does today, which is my favorite. That's where half of my stuff came from. Okay, so basically the story of California is very, very complicated, and it's interesting because we had all kinds of people here, right? All kinds of Europeans that were coming and kind of poking around like the Russians, hanging out, kind of doing a little trading, but not doing a whole lot. The United States, of course, didn't want it until the Russians wanted it, and, fighting, blah, blah, blah. But before any of that, the earliest European contact was obviously Spanish on this side of the continent. So land was divided up after the earlier explorations. We had huge land grants that were divided up and given to private families. So this map, there were Spanish and Mexican land grants. The land right here was actually never part of a land grant. If you guys go down in Santa Clarita, so like Placerita Canyon was, and out towards Simi, all of those areas were parts of land grants. So you can see this really beautiful map from the 1940s, I think. Yeah, 1937. And this is a huge print map. Those are some of the rancho properties and the land grants that were divided and given to private families, really wealthy private families. So Rancho San Francisco was the closest one. That was the one that was in Santa Clarita. So Pedro Fages was one of the Spanish explorers that came with the De Portola expedition in 1769. So he was here really, really early. They started down south in Alta, California. So there's Baja, lower, Alta, upper. And he came through, and it's kind of a funny story. The first knowledge that we know of a Spanish explorer passing through this area was this guy in 1772, because there were some soldiers, male soldiers, who disappeared with an equal number of native girls and went missing. So they went to look for them. So they believe he came through this area, and this is one that I want to iron out and find out if this is exactly this area. This is where they think the name Agua Dulce came from, because he passed through an area, and on his March 6, 1772 diary entry, it says they found fresh water in a small spring and called it sweet water. So we think that's here. Could be anywhere that there's a lot of arsenic in the water, though, you're going to get sweet water. So we got to figure that out for sure. So the mission system, you guys all learned about in 3rd grade and 4th grade, I'm sure. You had to build a little mission. They're still having the kids do that. So the mission system was created very early on in 1769. 21 missions were opened. In September of 1797, one of the later ones, the 17th, was Mission San Fernando. The location of the mission was only 16 miles from here. As you guys know, it's very close, just over the hill. By freeway, it takes a little longer because it's really protected by those hills coming up through there, but it also had a lot of really good water, was very well situated, and the climate, even when I go down there, it'll be freezing up here, and I've been going down there a lot recently, and it's 15 degrees warmer, there's no crazy wind, it's just very temperate and moderate over there. So they picked that because it's also really good ranching land. They had huge amounts of cattle, livestock, orchards, fruit trees. They turned out a lot of material out of there. But you need labor in order to really make that successful. So, as you guys know, there was this huge effort of taking in one way or another, either by alluring, by kidnapping, by a lot of really terrible practices to get native people throughout mostly Western California. So a lot of the more inland tribes were kind of spared from a lot of that, at least for a while. But all the missions went all the way up the coast. So a lot of those coastal groups were absorbed in one way or another into the mission system. So the Tataviam actually were one of the later groups to go into a mission. They believe between 1802 and 1816 was really when the rounding up was happening. But then by 1833 and 34, the missions were closing and being desecularized. So the Mexican government, now in control of California, secularized the posts, and in 1834, the San Fernando mission was shut down. While people of mixed ancestry stayed in the area, it was a difficult transitionary period, right? Because they couldn't afford land. Land was becoming increasingly privately owned. And it's like, and I studied history, me and my friend Adam here from my cohort at CSUN, we took were you in the Holocaust class?
Yes.
Oh, heart-wrenching. But you think of liberation, right? You have these camps and you have liberation. That's only a tiny piece of the puzzle. What are you going to do right after that? Where are you going to go? So it's very much the same thing with the mission system is, okay, you're free, but you don't have land. You've been disconnected with a lot of your family. You can't communicate with a lot of the older family members because you weren't allowed to learn your language. So what do? So it just always breaks my heart to think of that phase, because they did end up landing back on their feet. But for a lot of people, it was almost impossible to be able to do that. So I went backwards. Sorry, guys. How did I skip over one? No, I didn't. Sorry. Put these out of order. So as we said, between 1802 and 1816, the Tataviam people were kind of rounded up from this area, taken from San Fernando. After they arrived, they were baptized right away, given Christian names, and then through various very suppressive methods, they were discouraged from using their language, using their names, using their inherited practices, their songs, their food ways. They were eating all different foods. It was just an incredibly jarring time for them. And this is the phase, sorry, I think my slides got kind of out of order, but oh well. And this is when the bulk of the Tataviam language was lost, was because they were forced to not use it. And other tribal groups like the Chumash, you guys have all heard of the Chumash, that was a huge tribal group, and it still is. So because there was just so many people, they were able to maintain more of their language. So Tataviam, though, there is still quite a bit. And guys like Rudy are so great at reviving it, which is really awesome. They still know some place names. They know conjugations of words. They know how to, the place of the whatever, like Tahunga. You guys, we kind of expect all these names in Southern California to be Spanish names, but a lot of them aren't. Cahuenga and Tahunga are native names, right? Tahunga meaning the place of the old woman, which is really cool. Yeah, and even Castaic and Malibu and all these words that are native that we assume are just Spanish, but they're hanging in there, which is really neat. So yeah, and if you want to learn more about language, go to their website. So pretty rapidly, there became less and less full-blooded Tataviam, and there had always been mixing with, neighboring groups also, but, by, I believe it was 1911, Bernice? Let's see if she knows. Last full-blooded Tataviam, they believe, passed away, or was it 1921? I know, it was either 1911 or 1921, and it was when the last full speaker and the last full-blooded Tataviam, 2 men passed away. So, but that's a question that we get all the time, is that they're all gone, there's no Tataviam left. There are hundreds of them. It's just that there's a lot of mixed heritage now. It's not people that are exclusively Tataviam blooded, but a lot have there's a lot of mixing going on. We got some Shumash, some Tongva, some, Kawayasu. We've got all kinds of really cool melting going on. So a lot of the people who are active in the tribes today have family all over Southern California, and they have DNA linkage to all of these different tribal areas, which is really neat. So 1821, the Spanish colony of Mexico charged Spain with a war for independence, which was completed the following year. Mexican rule of Alta California was short, lasting just over 20 years. So it's a big period that we all know about, but it was actually very, very brief. 1847, the Mexican-American War waned in California with the signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga, which ended the fighting aspect of the war. And that's the treaty that most people don't even really know about. They don't really teach you about that in school. The next year was the more famous treaty, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the war and laid out the prices to be paid. So that's the part that everybody remembers. So this included the territory of Alta California, which became the state of California. People trying to break in. Okay, so we're right at 2 o'clock, so that's perfect. Would you guys like a little break? Would you like to get up and move around and eat some cookies? Okay, so let's come back in a little under 10 minutes. Okay. So basically we had this period after the native people in this area were relocated, and there's some thought that some people did come back because, a lot of the tribal family members coming out of the mission, especially younger people, knew that they knew which villages their families came out of, right? So there's some evidence that people did come back to this area. Like some of the rock art in the area is really interesting because it actually has, if you look at it, it's what's called incising, it's etching into the rock in lines, but they weren't done with stone, because when you use stone, it's not, even if you use obsidian, which is so sharp, it dulls. So you'll have a line that's really sharp and then it tapers out as the stone dulls. These look like they were made with metal blades, which they would have received while they were in and coming out of the mission system. So there is some evidence that we haven't really locked down for sure, but it would make sense that people would come back here, right? But there was land. These weren't homesteads yet. They weren't privately owned. But how would you know how to survive here? If you grew up in the mission, you wouldn't know how to really hunt or, how to process acorns, which can very easily keep you alive if you do it right, or it can make you very ill if you don't do it right. So this area, which is really sad, it was this buzzing place for thousands of years with this really active village site, and it fell into this really quiet period. So I always wonder what it would have been like back then while relatively nobody was here. So that's just kind of something interesting to think about. And a little bit later, when we talk about our scoundrel, Tiburcio Vasquez, we'll talk about kind of when people started coming into this area. But I want to jump ahead into this century and the end of the last one to talk about where the Tataviam are today, which is really exciting. So even after everything that went on, all of the cultural suppression, all of those practices that really were made to destroy their society and their existence was not successful, as evidenced by our family members that are here today. Yay! So the tribe today is known as the Fernandeño-Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. So it's a nod to the old name Tataviam, but also the time that was spent in the San Fernando mission, because this is where, you know, genealogically, a lot of the families that are still active today, their ancestors came out of the mission. And there is confusion over which tribal groups went to which mission. The Tataviam pretty much only went to San Fernando, but San Fernando had more than just Tataviam people that were there. So there were some desert folks that had kind of come in there. There was other, some coastal, just like little pockets and little areas where people were pulled in. They were basically pulled into where there was room and where it was closer. So we just say Tataviam today, but the interesting thing is, as I should have said earlier, the name Tataviam is a really, really beautiful word and really meaningful word. So one translation is that it means people facing the sun or people of the sunny slopes, but it's not a Tataviam word. It's a Katanemuk word. It's a word from just over the hills to the north, because there was so much cultural destruction that we don't know what the Tataviam originally called themselves, which is really, really, really sad. But at least it's a word that is accurate, because, and you know, I always think too, if you live here in the San Gabriels, the north side or the south facing side of your slopes are nice and warm, right? They get the sunlight all day. The north sides are where it's a little bit colder. You're in the shade more often. So a lot of the tribal settlements were on the north facing sides of slopes. But I always wonder too, if this was the largest settlement site and you look out there, all of our rocks point to the northeast. So the south are the sides that are always in the sun. So I kind of wonder if that name kind of stemmed too out of this place, which is really interesting. So this is the seal of the tribe today, which I absolutely love. They're incredibly active. There's, like I said, there's hundreds of descendants, highly, highly active descendants, which is really great. You go to any of the gatherings and they're big old parties. There's a lot of people that are there. They're still working on federal recognition, but it's hard for a lot of California, especially LA County area tribes, because part of federal recognition means being granted land by the federal government, right? Land in LA County is highly desirable and very expensive. So a lot of the tribal groups further out into the desert or in big wide open states, I don't want to say it's easier, because achieving recognition is always a battle for the tribes, but when you're in an area that's, you know, one of the capitals of the whole world, that makes it a really, really difficult uphill battle. So it's just something to kind of keep an eye on, and we'll see what happens. So tribal leadership under the last several generations has been under the Ortega family, which is really great. So you guys saw Rudy Sr. earlier, who adopted the name Chief Little Bear. So this is him back in his day. He was really active in the Southern California movements, the Native American Indian movement, and then his son Rudy Jr. took over for his dad when he was killed unexpectedly in a car accident. And it's funny because Rudy was actually in his 80s when he passed, which I didn't even know it because he was so young. He seemed 20 years younger than he actually was. But he was just very, very full of life, very stoic, very knowledgeable and passionate. And what I always really respected and still respect the older I get about Rudy Sr. is that he was huge on the democracy of everyone having a voice and being involved in what the tribe did. So you can't say more about that than that's how things should be done. And Rudy Jr., we love Rudy. He's again, very stoic, he's got a good poker face, I guess we should say. But he's been such a tremendous leader that took it on earlier than he thought he was going to have to. He was pretty young when he became the leader, but he's just embraced it and ran with it. And they've done such a wonderful job of keeping everything not just existing, but growing and expanding. So I'll show you some examples of the stuff that they do. A lot of gathering and education everywhere that they can out here, but all the way, so there's a picture of one of the elders, Alan, all the way in England, teaching them about the Tataviam tribe and identity, which is really exciting. There's huge family gatherings, public events, and again, these are not only just for family members or tribal members, it's for whoever is interested in coming. So one branch too, the tribe also operates different 501c3 nonprofits. So Puku Cultural Community Service is a really great one. It's been around, I didn't put the date on here, it's been around for 20 years or so, been around for a while. And these are just some of the programs that they do. So they do music programs, scholarships, family funds, helping new parents with kind of just figuring out how it all works. They have programs for elders. This is one we're going to talk about in a minute, the Haramakna Indian Cultural Center that's up in the forest, which is a really great facility. Disaster assistance and emergency services, just really great resources for tribal family members to get help however they need it. And this is the logo for Puku, which is really beautiful. So one of my favorite places where we go every summer is Haramakna American Indian Cultural Center. So if you guys have gone and driven up into the forest, if you know where Red Box Canyon is, it was a historic fire camp that was up there, and it's got these cool old buildings. But the tribes had an operating agreement there for 20 years. So we just missed it. It was like last weekend, right? The 20th anniversary, they had a gathering and big old party. But it's just a really, really cool place where you bring in education on all sorts of people. They have a great little museum, and it's a tiny building, but there's so much awesome stuff in there. And they've got stuff from the Gabrielian Yotangva group, Shumash, Fernandeño-Tataviam, Kitanamuk, and Serrano. And they have sections that break down each of those tribal identities, which is really, really helpful and really interesting. So these are some of the things that the Cultural Center does. So these two on the side, so that's my group of interns. So if they watch this, hi guys. We go there every summer and we do service projects, from removing invasive plants, installing guardrails, all kinds of fun, hard work over the summer. And this is one of the exhibits that they have in there. Really great stuff. They also do outreach. So if you don't go up to the forest to see them, they do all kinds of really neat crafts and educational booths at different street fairs and events and all kinds of stuff. So this is a beautiful young lady using a pump drill. So this is one of the drills I was kind of talking about, where you use that momentum and it goes up and down, and that's how you drill holes into anything, wood, soapstone, shell, anything like that. So another aspect that is alive and well, and this is one that we just partied with like last week, is the soapstone carving is still very much alive and well also. So this is with another one of our elders, Ted Garcia, and Ted's got, again, he's got really cool ancestry too. He's got some Shumash, desert lineage. I think he's got some Tongva in there. He's got all kinds of stuff going on. And he was another cousin too. So one of Bernice's many cousins. But he's done this beautiful revival of soapstone carving. And you guys can see he makes all kinds of stuff. This is actually actinolite, which is a related material, but this is a vessel that's about this big, and you can see it in the Natural History Museum. So if you guys go down there, which you should, go to the Becoming LA exhibit, and this is right up front, and it's absolutely beautiful. And he does this by hand. There's a little turtle he made, and he actually made for me and my husband a dolphin for our wedding, because we had Ted, we're like, can you come to our wedding? So he was part of our wedding ceremony. So he made me a little dolphin. That's my favorite thing that I own. And this is kind of the process of him carving. You can see up top. He makes it look so easy. We tried to do it the other day, so I'll show you guys what I made. I passed this around already, right? This one? Yeah. So this was from that workshop. So it was a perfect example of showing, people with no discrimination of where they're coming from, how to do these awesome things. So, and I'll pass this around. This is going to be really noisy. Actually, maybe I won't pass around. Maybe if you want to see it, come up later and look at it. So this was from the last one. Jesus is laughing because he made one too. So we made rattles, and these are all out of native materials. So just things that, well, this has a dowel, I lied, sorry. But typically you could use anything, antler, branches, anything like that. but these are the native gourds that we used, and go to workshops and learn how to make this stuff. And we joked because Jesus and I go to meetings, so we're just gonna like play with these all during meetings and be really loud, and it'll be amazing. So there's also really meaningful events. This one is one that I just think is really, really cool, the Walk for Ancestors. And this was one lovely young lady, Caroline Ward Holland, amongst others, but I think she's the one that did the entire path, walked the entire line of the historic route of the mission system. And as she passed through our area and through the mission San Fernando, there was a beautiful gathering of the families, and just a good time for reflection and prayer and thinking about how far they've come since then, because it hasn't been easy. It's taken a lot of work to be able to do that. And just a beautiful picture of her while she was there. There's a long way to go. And almost over with this, but so some of the projects that are going on right now is at Rancho Camulos. You guys can help build a Tataviam village, which is really cool. There actually was going to be a work day today for it, but they rescheduled because it's been pouring rain so hard. But they're going to start up again probably in January. So if you guys are interested in going out there and helping, or if you guys, some of you have grandkids that are big and young and strong and want to lift and move a bunch of stuff, let them burn their energy here. So this is a really great site too. This is one of the dwellings that you can see what they really look like. So there's going to be, I forget how many, but quite a few of them built to show what kind of the center of a village would have looked like, which is really special. So I'll leave you with this. There's a million more things to say about this story, but basically just if you're interested, reach out, get involved, talk to these guys. If you have Facebook, they have a really great presence on Facebook. They post all kinds of events and lectures and gatherings and dinners and stuff for kids, stuff for older folks, stuff for everybody. So this is the website. It's tataviam-nsn-us. It's a really simple site. Yeah, take a picture of it if you'd like. Or if you just Google Tataviam, it'll come up. But it's a really great website. It has full timelines of the history, a lot of pictures, a lot of information, family lineages, a lot of really great stuff. So anything I didn't cover, which is a lot, is on there. So yeah. So we just, want to show our appreciation, and I'm so thankful that they've been so supportive of me. I'm just this kid that's like, hey, I want to learn more. And they're like, all right, come on in. So it's just been a very positive thing, because I feel so connected with this place. I grew up around the corner, walking the same trails, drinking the same water, getting into the same mischief that these kids did, thousands of years before me. So it's just very special to be welcomed and appreciated, and, and having that mutual admiration for people that just want to help, and just want to get the word out. So there we go. So we'll put a pin in our story there. If you guys have any questions too, I have some other stuff you guys can come look at afterwards, but we're going to move on now to something that Bernice has been waiting for. This guy. I know, who came for Tiburcio? It's always ladies. It's never guys, except Joe. He's proud of it. Okay, so this is good. I'm going to get you guys out of here right on time. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a troublemaker. Actually, he didn't start off that way. So one of the questions I get asked the most is, who was Vasquez? What was Vasquez? I heard he murdered 1 million people and da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh, no. So it's like any other people, right? People are complicated. This man is absolutely no different at all. And if you want to learn more, actually, I'm going to do this plug right now. Oh, I don't want that thing to screech at me. Hold on. I have short arms. I can't reach. Okay, so if you want to learn more about Vasquez, there is a ton of inaccurate information about him. People loved romanticizing his life when he was alive and ever since then. But this book, Bandito, by John Bosenecker, is the best one. Big book. He spent a lot of time researching this guy, still actively researches him. But it's a really wonderful book, but it's also beautifully written. I didn't get Vasquez. It didn't click for me until I read this book. And you can see, this is Shirley's bookmark. And these are my bookmarks. So ignore those, but I'll pass this around if you guys want to kind of take a picture of it or look at it. So Who was Tiburcio Vasquez? And I'm going to read some of this because it's a lot of words. A complex man, Vasquez was a well-educated bilingual Californio who was often noted for his athleticism, outdoor navigation skills, horsemanship, clever wit, musical ability, charisma, resourcefulness, and his charm. So his family, interestingly, were not criminals, right? They were honest, religious, and respected. They'd come to California in 1776, so very early, with the Dion's expedition. And they helped found the cities of San Francisco and San Jose. During the gold rush, the world rushed into the new territory, and Hispanic Californians, known as Californios, became strangers in their own land. Monterey became one of the most violent communities in American history, which you don't realize now because you think of Monterey and it's scenic, it's kind of touristy, it's really beautiful, old Victorian houses. But young Vasquez came of age amidst great violence and social upheaval. So here's one of the youngest, I think, pictures that I've found of Vasquez. You can tell he's trying to look pretty swaggery right there. But he's young there. He's pretty close to 20 years old, I believe, in this picture. So he was born in 1835 in Monterey. In his teenage years, he worked as a vaquero on ranchos. So he was really great with horses very early on in his life. But by the time he was about 14, which you guys know is a rough time for kids anyway, especially if they can fall into the wrong crowd, which is exactly what happened to him. When he was 17, so this is 1852, he was so enterprising also. He opened a combination saloon, dance hall, and gambling parlor at 17. That's crazy. And this is when he started to really get in trouble. So back in the day, California was so spread out that you had these really big bandit gangs that would go on. One of the leaders, they called him a chieftain, was Anastasio Garcia. And he really kind of came under Garcia's wing. But he fell in love with Garcia's sister and became engaged. They broke up 2 years later, and this was his last serious relationship. And from what Bosenecker kind of writes, this was kind of a turning point for him. It really, really broke his heart, and he never got over it. 2 years later, 1854, Tiburcio and Garcia got mixed up in a Fandango house brawl, and Constable William Hardmount, who was only 25, was shot to death. So this is where, he wasn't arrested here, but this is when he got on law enforcement radar. They're like, this kid is hanging out with the wrong people, he's trouble, we'll get him later. So this is kind of a long one. It might be kind of, I guess you guys can read it. Writing's not too small, but I'll read it for those who are like me and can't see anything. So this is the passage from that book that totally made me understand Vasquez. So for many California youths like Vasquez, these were traumatic times. They'd been completely unprepared for the rapid and complete conquest. The traditions that rooted Californios to their heritage were under constant attack from the new Anglo culture. The pastoral California customs, their old ways of life, were fast disappearing. Californios were losing control over their own lives. Their future was dark and uncertain. Perhaps because Tiburcio's siblings were older, they adapted well to these changes. They led busy lives filled with child-rearing and hard work. His sisters, and especially his mother, were devoted to their Catholic faith, which gave them hope and taught them to forgive and forget the ill treatment they received from the Anglos. But Tiburcio was cut from a different cloth. Early on, he rejected the church and its teachings. Beneath his gentle, good-humored nature, he harbored deep hatred against gringos. At the same time, he loved the social life of Monterey and its fiestas, bailes, and fandangos. His poetry, singing, and guitar playing brought him success in serenading and wooing the Pueblo señoritas. Although he had learned the traditional skills of hunting, herding cattle, and butchering livestock, he had no interest in the simple life of a vaquero. He began to reject the traditional California values of hard work, Catholicism, frugality, and self-restraint, and became increasingly fascinated by the pursuit of leisure, young women, personal independence, and sexual freedom. Reaching maturity in a time of great social upheaval, Tiburcio stood on the threshold of an entirely different kind of life in old Monterey. And that's just like a random passage from the book, but it like totally changed how I understood this. Because when he was born, everything was under Mexican rule, but by the time he was a young teenager, the American government had taken power. So if he had been 20 when that happened, it probably would have been different. But because he was so young and going through adolescence, it changed the rest of his life. So here's another photo. And this is an interesting one that I had never even seen before. And when I was researching this slideshow before, it popped up, but it was mislabeled. He had, I think they put his name was like Claudio Vasquez or something. And I was like, that's not right. But it's a really great picture of him though. He was a little bit vain, so he liked having his picture taken. So at age 20, they played leading roles in Monterey's vicious Roach-Belcher feud, which left 14 men dead. And he still hadn't been arrested yet though. So this is the turning point. When he was 22 in 1857, he was captured around Bouquet Canyon, just over here, like 10 minutes from here, for a horse and cattle theft with two of his friends who were native teenagers. The friends pinned Vasquez as the orchestrator and took pleas deals. I need autocorrect on that one. And they only received very minimal sentences. On the other hand, Tiburcio was sentenced for 5 years in the brand new San Quentin prison, which already had a reputation for being a very scary place to be. And this really helped kind of cement his resentment towards the Anglo government. So where we come in, so during his sentence, he helped orchestrate 4 prison breaks that left 20 people dead. He kept trying to get out over and over and over, and every time it would extend his sentence rather than just dealing with the 5 years. So 1862, he helped orchestrate his last big prison break, and he was finally successful. So this is actually one of the largest prison break attempts in the history of our country, and it involved over 100 prisoners. 10 were killed and over 30 were injured, and he actually got out for good. He cemented his place here as an icon and no longer a passive participant. And at this point, Boesnecker kind of talks to about, he took pride in that he was one of the big guys now. He was running with the big dogs. So after his escape, he became a powerful leader for others, mainly horse thieves. Under his watch, multiple bands aided in horse theft, transferring stolen animals into various regions to the north and south of Agua Dulce. So that's the biggest thing. If you're stealing horses, what's the best thing you can do? Get them out of where they came from, right? Because you're not going to know. If you steal them from the desert and move them out to the coast, nobody out there is going to recognize them. You know, even if they're branded, doesn't matter. And that's what I tell people when people ask, "Where's the treasure?" That's the other question we get all the time. Where's the treasure? For one, if I knew where it was, I'm not going to tell you. But mostly what he was moving through here were horses, right? Because you could actually graze and water your horses here and kind of hide out. But the other thing is he was a gambler. So he loved ladies and he loved gambling and drinking. So like, I don't know about you, but any of the gamblers that I know are not really good at holding on to large sums of money. So no, there's no treasure. I'm gonna settle it here. That's what I tell people too. I'm like, I wouldn't have student loans if I knew where it was. Come on. So what drew Vasquez to Los Angeles County? Because you guys know, Monterey is not close to here, right? That's a long journey, especially on horseback. But his brother Chico, who was normal and law-abiding, moved to LA to the Acton area in Soledad Canyon after 1860. So he farmed, ranched, and worked in the Soledad mine. So he just lived in today's Acton, kind of by where Ravenna used to be. So he was really close to here. The other reason, the bad reason, is his buddy, Jim Hefner, who was a criminal, lived just over the hill in Elizabeth Lake, like just over the Sierra Pelonas right there. Together in 1874, so this is when he was captured too, but they robbed a stagecoach between Ravenna and Mill Creek, which is just right on Angeles Forest Highway today. So this one I have to read. So he was a poet. He was very artistic. He had that artistic temperament. This is one of his poems that he wrote. I can't remember if this is one that he wrote while he was in prison awaiting execution or if it was earlier than that, but I'll read it for you guys because I care about you so much. I can't even read it without laughing. With a sincere love, I worship you. When, beauty at my side, I had you. With a sincere love, I pledge my adoration. I worship, I adore you with my soul. Come on. Separated from you, alone, lost, sad and melancholy, I pass the time, alone remembering my idolized love. In my solitude, alone I contemplate. I call to you and I ask that you help me. I remember my grief and bitterness. I know heaven hears me in those moments. What madness. So dramatic. Although the two of us find ourselves far apart, always my heart beats for you, and I send you my outstretched hand, angel of my heart that is, Fulanita. Come on. This guy knew how to lay it on real thick, real thick. But that's a really good capture into his personality also. He was this very sappy, almost artistic, very sensitive person, which is kind of why you could see he was more susceptible when he was going through all of this when he was younger, that it just tore him up. But he's a very multi-dimensional, multifaceted person. So why was he so hard to catch? Why was he a fugitive for so long? He was really athletic. He wasn't very tall, but he was really wiry and strong. He could run really fast. He could ride a horse incredibly fast. And part of that too is that when you're robbing a horse or a group of horses, you're going to keep the fastest one, right? You're going to keep the best one for yourself. So often he had these nearly superhuman horses that were better than any of the constables had, were better than any military branch could keep. So he was just really on top of it. He knew the land also really well. He knew it like the back of his hand, even when he was up north or down here, east to west, even out towards Walker Pass when you're heading towards Kern. Like, he was all the way out there, and he knew all the back roads. He knew all the shortcuts where he could hide. But part of it too is that he had people that helped him or were afraid of him, right? So there were certain cases where there's evidence of him making agreements that if I don't hurt you or rob you this time, you're going to help me out the next time. And he did a lot of that, a lot of bargaining. And a lot of people would kind of help hide him because of that too. He also frequented large, unpatrolled areas that were uninhibited, like our area. Nobody was really living here, and you could camp for days here without being seen. And especially if you could hunt like he could stay here probably for weeks at a time without even being spotted. So many, a couple decades almost pass in between when he was first escaping for the last time and when he was actually caught. And they think he only ended up being caught because he let them catch him. He was growing very weary of this whole life on the run. And a story says he went to his brother Chico's house one night and wanted him to turn him in for the $8,000 reward, which I should have calculated for inflation. That's an incredible amount of money in the 1870s. That's crazy. So this is the part where a lot of people kind of will idolize Tiburcio, but this is, as kids walk in, this is not a great part of the story, in that they believe that he did have a child with his niece. So that's part of the story that's very not okay. But they believe he wanted that reward money for his brother to get so that he could help raise that child. The son moved in with the family, so this is his baby, to Leona Valley, and insisted until his death that he was the nephew of Tiburcio, not knowing that he was his son. So February of 1874, Vasquez's last visit to our area came. He and Chavez fled after robbing an LA stagecoach near Ravenna. And this was kind of a last straw thing. They triggered this massive manhunt because they're like, this guy's making a fool of us again. We can't catch him. So they invested more staff and more resources into hunting him down. And they knew he was down here. They knew he wasn't up north again. So they did this massive effort to get him. So while so skilled in dodging law enforcement throughout his career, Vasquez seemed to grow less diligent about evading escape. He moved slower. He didn't hide his tracks as well. And after decades as a fugitive, he was captured on May 14th, 1874 in Monterey Park in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of really interesting artifacts associated with Vasquez. So this thing is huge. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. This was his .44 caliber handgun. I can't even imagine, 4 pounds. That thing is a monster. Loading of 40 grains of black powder, which is also insane. This is one of the Magnum revolvers of the Victorian era. So this is, John Bosenecker also has a lot of artifacts that he's gathered over time, and some of them are at the State Archive, and some I think he has loaned out to different areas on display. So here's a couple of others. So it was a huge deal when he was captured. He was very famous back then. Cause especially for people, all the way back on the East Coast, they didn't have these Hispanic, really suave Zorro type bandits, right? So he was like a celebrity, and especially because he was on the run for so long. So it was all over newspapers. You can find newspapers coast to coast that have him in there. This is an illustration as part of a report that was the scene of his capture. And they really like to sensationalize a lot of it. They'd put it in as many newspapers as they could, ham it up as much as they could. So his trial began in January of 1875. So it took the jury all of 5 minutes to return the verdict of guilty. I believe it was unanimously guilty, with a punishment of death by hanging. The 39-year-old was hanged at 1:35 p.m. on March 19th, 1875. 39-year-old. He was not even an old man. So these are interesting. These are actually a little bit morbid, but relics of the sentencing and execution. So there are a lot of letters that he had ladies coming to visit him in prison, writing him letters. He would write them letters. That's where I think that poem came from. He had his portrait taken again, couldn't stop himself. So this was a portrait while he was actually awaiting execution. There's a ticket. They sold tickets to the execution. There's part of the noose that was used. This is the cravat that he was wearing, not when he was hanged, but I think when he was awaiting, and the rosary that he held also. So, what do you do when you have an executed felon? You name public places after him. So, we're actually down one. So up north in Monterey, there was a middle school called, I think it was, Tiburcio Vasquez Middle School. They recently, just like 2 years ago, changed the name. But you can see this was the Vasquez Thundercats. Vasquez High School in Acton, however, where I went, is still Vasquez High School. Yeah. So we just tell people it's named after the rocks, which are named after the felon. But they tried to, there was a group too back in the 90s when the school was being created, and they wanted it to be the Bandits, the Vasquez Bandits, and they're like, no, can't do that. So we're the Mustangs instead. But also up north, here's a picture of the Tiburcio Vasquez Health Center, which is like a public health clinic. Obviously the park that we're standing in is named after Vasquez. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but kind of the interesting thing is, I don't think this would still be Vasquez if it wasn't for the homesteaders, because they're the ones that really amped up that name. So Henry Craig, who's the one that homesteaded that whole part of the park, including the big famous rock, he came in 1919, and the family had it until county leased it in 64, but they owned it until the late 60s. And the family needed that. They needed the tourism to come in, so they kept calling it Vasquez Rocks, Vasquez Rocks. So yeah, I know, it's very smart. It's good marketing. Because apparently you can do really bad things, but if it's a good story, people don't care. And even then, Walt Disney presents Zorro. So Zorro is based off of mainly kind of that whole idea of that mystical, romantic, swaggering bandit, but mainly from Joaquin Murrieta and from Tiburcio Vasquez. So if that's why when you hear about Vasquez, you think of Zorro, is because they were based off of those guys. Because you couldn't make that up. That's not something you could just imagine. These were real people that used their wiles, I guess you could say, and their charisma to have really successful criminal careers, which is very interesting. So that's basically it. Boop. I'll go to that one. So we have like 10 minutes if anybody wants to ask a couple questions. We kind of ran out of time last time for questions, but I don't know if there's probably stuff I forgot. So if I forgot anything and you want to know about it, let me know. Anybody? Or you can come talk to me after too if you don't want to be on the spot. All right, guys. So, I forgot to do the preview for next time. I am so terrible. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just discussing this with someone at the intermission. Supposing you're out hiking and you find something that you think may be an artifact.
Yes, I should have addressed that. So, what do you guys think you should do if you find an artifact? Yes, a combination of all of those things. If it's something very minimal that you can hide, that you can scooch under like a juniper, by all means, look at it, enjoy it, maybe take a picture of it if you'd like. Hide it. Don't carry it far away, just kind of scooch it off the trail so that it can stay, right? Not only is it illegal to take anything from here, because this is actually federally protected land, we're on the National Register of Historic Places because of our cultural significance as an archaeological area. So you can't legally take anything from this place. Except trash. Take all the trash. But yeah, if you do see something, or if you see something that you think is really important or sends a red flag to you, let us know. Like we said with the graffiti last time, take a GPS, call our office, send us an email, any one of us, let us know and we can go check it out too, because this was a village site for a long time, so there is stuff out there. And I should have said too, where a lot of this stuff came from, the stuff that I was passing around, is in my family's care, which is one of those things where it just kind of happened. People back in the day, this is, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that lived out here, they would be grading for houses, and when they were grading, they would have things like giant pestles or grinding bowls or anything come up, and they wouldn't know what to do with them. So a lot of them serve as doorstops or paperweights or anything like that. So working with Charlie and all these guys, my dad really kind of became the hub for a lot of the protection of natural and native resources in this area because he just cared about it so much. So first it started with someone saying, hey, I'm moving away. My kids and grandkids don't want this. I don't want it to leave the area. Will you take this for us? And my dad's like, okay. And then it happened again and again and again and again. And so my dad kind of became the default caregiver of a lot of the artifacts here that people would find on their properties. I should say nothing that I've passed around is from the park. Nothing at all. It's all from just everywhere from here, from the to the foot of the Sierra Polonas that people would find mostly when they were grading, because most of the stuff is buried. So they'd be putting in a pool and they'd find giant stone tools and stuff like that. So they kind of just, and we're not the owners of them, right? None of this belongs to us. We're just the stewards. And since my dad passed away, it fell to me. So now I'm the caregiver for these. But the really exciting thing is, especially as the tribe expands, and that's what Jesus and I were talking about earlier, the tribe right now is not a depository for artifacts. It's like a special, not a designation, but resources you have to have in space, in the right climate control and everything like that to house artifacts. And so we encourage people like me who have things, be open with the tribe, talk to them, let them know that you're keeping it safe. And, and my dad and Rudy Sr. and now me and Rudy Jr. have an agreement that if there ever is a better facility or space to be the long-term keepers of this, that's what we want. And we all have the same wish that we want this stuff to stay here. We don't want it to go in an archive or in the basement at the, Natural History Museum or up to the state archive or anything like that. It needs to stay here and it needs to stay accessible. So it's not a perfect situation, but it also allows me to do outreach stuff like this. So you guys can feel and see these things, which is really important. Because when things are behind glass, it's not alive like it is when you hold it, like that handstone where you feel the thumb mark, So if you find stuff, it's legal, obviously. If you find stuff on your property, you can't go onto public land, you can't go onto forestry property and go hunt for artifacts. Mostly because it's not any one person's history. It's the tribal history. It's all of our history because we're still here, So it's just one of those things. Just be respectful and just encourage your friends and family to be respectful. And if they find something, just scooch it so it can stay there and we have a lot of junipers and bushes. So that's what I do. If I see something, I'll take a photo of it, maybe GPS it, and then I'll put it back, close to where it was, where nobody could see it. So that's a good question. But it's no perfect system, just do what you think is the right thing to do. So anybody else? Yeah.
I don't remember you talking much, or maybe I missed it, but human remains of the tribespeople that were here for so long.
Yeah. So
were they buried, or what was the practice?
Yeah, so interestingly, as time changed, there was different burial practices. There are levels where there are what we call an inhumation, which is just the entire body, but there was also, phases or eras of cremations. And it's all different depending on what the village group was doing at the time. There is no one answer to that, basically. It kind of evolved and changed over time. And obviously there are areas where we do know are sacred sites and cemeteries, and luckily they've been able to be kept very quiet so that they haven't been destroyed. But that's why too you have folks like Joe. That's how I met Joe, actually. All the way on the back was from doing monitoring. So when you have big development or utilities projects, you have a tribal monitor and you have a biological monitor and an archaeological monitor, which is what I did, because sometimes you do have a cemetery area that they don't even know is there. But, when you do research and, sometimes it happens when you're starting construction, and there it is. So that's why you stay very alert, because with the way California was, it was so many people inhabited it for so long that, we're all walking over each other's history kind of wherever you go. So yeah, and that's how too with burial sites, has really helped pattern like migration of people. That's how we know that the Tataviam kind of came, from the north, but originally had come from the desert, and kind of this big pattern and come back down, because you test mitochondrial DNA, you test heritage, all of that. And with like Charlie, with your family, so I think it was Tejon Ranch area goes back over like 1,000 years for you guys with like direct lineage. You were saying it's really amazing. So burials are obviously also completely to be treated with respect and minimally disturbed, but there are very non-invasive ways that you can test for DNA, so that you want to not find them. You want them to be left alone forever. But when it does happen, and the tribe works really well to handle every situation with it. So yeah, they're around, but it's like the rock art. We're not going to tell you where they are. Yeah, I know.
I was just curious if there were so many people there
Yeah.
for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you have cremations, it's obviously those are great because they really go back to the earth pretty quickly. So yeah. Anybody else? Look at that. We're done 3 minutes early, you guys. That never happens to me. So next talk, I am so silly that I can't think of which one it is. Does anybody have a little flyer? I think it's the early settlement one, pioneer era one. Remember? She got it in her purse.
American pioneer era.
Oh yeah, okay. So this one's cool. I know I say they're all my favorite, but like this one and the ones coming up are really, really fun. So we're going to talk a lot about basically the movement of American people into this area, some of the railroading. This one has a lot of pictures and a lot of really cool stuff. It's basically, so the January, February, and like April ones are all kind of connected to each other. It's the evolution of basically American people settling in and expanding and living in this area. So yeah, that's a cool one. We talk about homesteading. I wish I would have put a little slide together so you guys could see kind of what we're talking about, but you'll see it on the flyer and I'll put it all over the internet and stuff. So yeah, I'll give you your flyer back.
What's the date on that?
Is that the 12th?
Yes.
Okay. January 12th. 2019. What is that? All right. Well, I thank you guys so much for sitting here and having your bottoms go numb on me probably for 2 hours. But thank you so much for your support. Thank you for supporting our education and just being here for us and showing us this encouragement. So hopefully I can see you next time. Thank you. Yay. So if there's any cookies left, grab cookies, grab coffee to go. And I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much.